Okay, we're going to be talking about the regulation of blood glucose as a part of maintaining homeostasis within the body. So at any given time, we have glucose levels within our blood because we need to stay, the blood glucose levels need to stay consistent for cellular respiration because glucose is used as the substrate. And then too much blood glucose can actually change the osmolarity and cause health issues. So blood glucose comes from the ingestion of food and the breakdown through digestion because carbohydrates usually break down into, not usually, carbohydrates break down into monomers of sugars. So when blood glucose is elevated, like right after you've had a big meal and your blood glucose spikes sometimes, your pancreas, which is an organ within your digestive system, secretes insulin into the blood. So the first hormone we need to be aware of is insulin. And so insulin is secreted through the pancreas. When insulin is secreted into the bloodstream, it binds to receptors on muscle and fat cells and it increases the permeability. So what this means is you have think of your muscle and fat cells as little nets. When insulin binds to receptors, it kind of like pushes a button on a muscle and fat cell, and it tells these nets to open up in terms of their size of what they're letting through. And this means that glucose can easily enter the cell for energy and storage. So insulin works as a receptor binding hormone. It just taps the receptors on a muscle cell. The muscle cell is like, oh yes, like our blood glucose is elevated, so I need to take in this glucose now. So the glucose enters the cell for energy and storage, and obviously there's a capacity to how much glucose one singular muscle cell can store, so the rest of it is converted by the liver, which is another organ within your digestive system, into glycogen. And glycogen is kind of just the compact stored form of glucose. And that is the process of glycogenesis. It's the process of converting excess glucose into packed glycogen molecules to be stored within your liver. And then because the glucose has been removed from your bloodstream, your levels fall back to normal and your body continues operating. So that's the process of what happens when your blood glucose levels are elevated. Now in reverse, the second part of this is when your blood glucose concentration falls. So if you haven't eaten in a long time and there's not enough concentration of glucose in your blood, and that often leads to symptoms of dizziness and fatigue because you just don't have enough energy to supply your cells to meet the metabolic demands that they need to have. And what happens is when your blood glucose concentration falls, the pancreas, again, releases glucagon into the blood. So the second hormone we need to be aware of is glucagon. And glucagon targets the liver because from what we remember from the first part, the excess glucose that we haven't used yet is stored in the liver. So glucagon goes to the liver and it stimulates the breakdown of stored glycogen into usable glucose. So it's the opposite of this step. So instead of converting glucose into glycogen, glucagon presses the button on the liver and it tells the liver, okay, we need this extra glucose now. So the stored glycogen is then turned to usable glucose. And it's the process of glycogenolysis. It's a splitting of glycogen to produce usable glucose. And if the stores within your liver of glucose are non-sufficient, your protein and fat can also break down to glucose, which is a process of glucogenesis. So after all of this breakdown of either glycogen into glucose or your proteins and fat into glucose, you have enough levels of glucose back in the bloodstream and there's an increase in concentration, which means your body can go back to operating as normal. So the main three things: one, glycogenesis is the process of excess, so too much glucose being converted into glycogen stores in your liver. Glycogenolysis is when the liver glycogen is broken down into more usable glucose. And gluconeogenesis is the conversion of fat or protein into glucose. So the ending product is your bloodstream will always have enough glucose circulating. So what this means during exercise is when our body is moving and we have lots of muscular contraction happening, we need more glucose in the blood because we need to supply our muscles with the metabolic substrates that they need to continue contracting. So muscular contraction, because it requires ATP, it can kind of open a side door. Glucose uptake is independent and it doesn't require insulin anymore, because your muscle contraction causes the glucose to enter your muscle cells regardless of whether or not insulin binds onto a receptor. So insulin is not needed during exercise. Because if we had both insulin and muscle contraction happening at the same time, it would just cause a massive dip in blood glucose levels, because all of the glucose would go in to cells at once and you would lose concentration really quickly. So we don't want a double combined effect of both contraction and insulin. They work independently of each other. So because you're, you don't want that to happen, because it causes hypoglycemia, which is when you have too low blood sugar inside your inside your body. And then your sympathetic nervous system releases glucagon and epinephrine, which stimulates glycogenolysis when there's not enough glucose left in your bloodstream to supply your working muscles, which allows your muscles to continue working with released glucose into the blood, because it stimulates the breakdown of more glycogen from your liver, and then that is put into the bloodstream, and then your muscles use that to facilitate muscular contraction, to supplement the muscles with substrate for ATP. For contraction requiring ATP. So the benefits and chronic adaptations of exercise: one is improved insulin sensitivity. Because insulin and muscle contraction doesn't work at the same time, the more muscular contraction you have, the less insulin is released into your blood. So therefore, every time that insulin is then released into your blood, your body is more sensitive to it because it's seen it less times. You have lower blood glucose levels if you're constantly exercising, which is good. These 2 points repeat, so we can just take this one out. And the ability of your insulin to bind to receptors increase during exercise. And there's a general lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes, because your insulin sensitivity is normal, and your body can then keep on reacting to hormones and receptors the way it's supposed to, and you can maintain a healthy body fat more easily through exercise. Yeah, so that is everything for regulation of blood glucose.